The stars beyond the command viewport were cold. They always were in this sector, thin, distant, arranged in patterns that the Verith cartographers had catalogued centuries ago as strategically unremarkable. Sector 7 Omega. The edge of what the hegemony had formally designated as the human containment zone. Not a place of importance. Not a place of resistance. A graveyard, by most measures. Supreme Fleet Commander Drathvale watched those stars and felt nothing but impatience. He was a creature of empire. 400 years old by the human reckoning his staff used in their translation matrices, and in those 4 centuries he had watched 17 civilizations submit. Not fall, submit. There was a difference, and Drathvale appreciated the distinction. Falling implied a fight worth remembering. Submission was simply the natural conclusion of any encounter with Verith military doctrine. His fleet. The 8th conquering armada, 214 warships strong, accompanied by 40 support vessels and 6 orbital siege platforms, sat at the edge of this unremarkable sector and waited for his order. 214 warships. The largest assembled Verith strike force in 60 years. It was, he privately admitted, excessive for the task. But the High Council had insisted on overwhelming force, and Drathvale had learned long ago not to argue with the High Council about aesthetics. The humans had been a curiosity once. A short-lived, fragile species on a small world in an unspectacular solar system. They had achieved rudimentary spaceflight within the last 2 centuries, fast, by galactic standards, but the Verith had been a starfaring civilization for 11,000 years. They had built colony ships and mining platforms. They had even, improbably, managed to construct something their military called a defense fleet. The hegemony's intelligence division had catalogued it with professional disinterest, 43 vessels, most of them aging, half of them retrofitted from civilian designs, none of them equipped with weapons capable of penetrating a Verith phase shield. When the High Council had finally decided that the Sol Corridor represented a tactically valuable approach vector for the coming campaign against the Lyrian Compact, the humans had become a logistical problem rather than a strategic one. Clear the corridor. Absorb or pacify the population. Move on. A footnote in the campaign log. Drathvale had accepted the assignment without complaint. Commander. His second-in-command, Tactical Officer Sanray, approached from the bridge's sensor station with the unhurried gait of someone delivering expected news. Long-range probes have completed their sweep of the inner system. Human fleet activity detected near the 3rd planet and the asteroid belt perimeter. She held out a data slate. 41 warships confirmed. 2 are showing drive failure signatures. Several appear to be holding stationary positions near coordinates we've marked as their primary shipyard complex. Drathvale accepted the slate without looking at it. 41. Out of 43. He handed it back. They're missing 2. Likely lost to mechanical failure or decommissioned since last survey, Sanray said. Human construction quality is, well documented. Yes. He returned his gaze to the stars. Send the standard diplomatic refusal package. Give them 40 of their hours to acknowledge hegemony sovereignty and stand down their fleet. Then we advance. And if they refuse? He almost smiled. Then we do what we came to do. On the human side of the sensor line, in a command center that smelled of recycled air and burnt coffee, Fleet Admiral Yusra Okafor read the incoming Verith transmission with the particular stillness of someone who had been expecting exactly this message for a very long time. She was 53 years old. She had gray threading through her hair that she'd stopped bothering to address 2 years ago, when the projection models first confirmed that the Verith 8th Armada was being assembled. She had spent those 2 years doing things the Verith intelligence network apparently hadn't noticed, which was itself a carefully engineered outcome. They gave us 40 hours, said Captain Demir from the secondary console to her left. He was younger, sharper-edged, with the particular tension in his jaw of someone trying not to show how frightened he was. He was doing well, she thought. 40 hours, she said. Generous. 214 ships, Admiral. 214 that they're showing us. She picked up her coffee, which had gone cold. Pull up the deep array. Let's see how their formation is sitting. The holographic display above the central table populated with blue light, the position of every Verith vessel within long-range sensor range, arranged in the standard hegemony advance formation. 3 columns. Siege platforms at the rear. Fighter screens deployed in overlapping arcs. Textbook. Beautiful, in its way. She'd studied Verith tactical doctrine for 6 years. She knew this formation the way she knew her own heartbeat. Demir, she said, get me Commander Reyes on the Persephone. The channel opened within seconds. Commander Elena Reyes appeared on the secondary screen, a lean, exhausted-looking woman in her early 40s, aboard a ship that the Verith sensors had logged as stationary near the asteroid belt. She looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days, which was accurate. Admiral. How are your people? Ready, Reyes said, and the word landed flat and heavy and entirely convincing. The others? In position. All 17, confirmed and silent. Passive sensors only. Okafor nodded slowly. Then we wait 40 hours. She paused. And then we give them something to remember. Drathvale spent the 40 hours reviewing human historical records. It was a habit of his. He believed that understanding a species in their final hours of independence created a kind of completion to the process. Context for the report he would file with the High Council. He read about their wars, which were numerous and largely against each other. He read about their medicine, which was primitive but stubborn. He read about their art, which was unexpectedly varied. And he read about their military history, which was the part he had flagged for professional attention. They were, he noted, a species that did not give up easily. Not because they were powerful, they were not, but because they seemed structurally incapable of recognizing the practical advantages of surrender until the very last possible moment. He had seen this in the intelligence reports. The human military command had made no diplomatic contact beyond a brief acknowledgement of the Verith ultimatum. No negotiation. No public announcement of surrender. No visible redeployment of their fleet to a defensive gesture of compliance. They were simply sitting there, in their thin little formation near their small blue planet, waiting. It unsettled him, marginally. Not because he feared what 41 failing warships could accomplish against 214 modern Verith vessels, but because he had been in enough of these situations to know that when a species stopped negotiating, it usually meant one of 2 things. They had accepted the inevitable and were processing grief. Or they were doing something you couldn't see yet. He dismissed the thought. Their intelligence coverage of this system was comprehensive. There was nothing to see. He was wrong, of course. But he wouldn't understand that for another 11 hours. The Verith advance began on schedule, 2 hours before their own deadline expired. Drathvale saw no strategic value in waiting the full period. The 3 columns moved in precise formation, the phase shield generators cycling to full output, the weapons arrays warming to engagement temperature. At this range, the human fleet was a dim cluster of icons on the tactical display. His lead destroyers would reach engagement range in approximately 90 minutes. He sat in his command chair and watched them close. Commander. Sanrei's voice had a texture it hadn't carried before. Not alarm. Something adjacent to it. We're picking up a signal anomaly in the asteroid belt. Define anomaly. Power signatures. Multiple sources. They don't match anything in the human fleet register. He looked up from the tactical display. Location? Distributed throughout the asteroid field. The belt boundary running from grid 7 through grid 12. That was That was a significant stretch of space. Hundreds of thousands of kilometers. How many signatures? Sanrei was quiet for 3 seconds, which was unusual. We're still resolving, she said carefully. Initial count suggests a significant number. The asteroids have been interfering with passive scan resolution. He felt something in the back of his mind shift. A small, cold thing. Active scan. Full power. Now. The active scan pulse went out. The return signal took 47 seconds to process. When it resolved onto the tactical display, Drathvale stared at it for a long moment without speaking. The asteroid belt was not empty. It had not been empty, apparently, for some time. Distributed throughout the belt's leading edge, nestled into hollowed asteroids and debris shadows and positions that the passive scan geometry had perfectly obscured, were warships. Not the 41 aging human vessels they had catalogued. These were different. These were old. Ancient, by human standards. Some of the hull configurations matched designs that the intelligence archives dated to 60 and 70 years ago, vessels the humans had officially decommissioned and listed as salvaged or destroyed. They had been brought back. Rebuilt. Modified. Refitted with systems his tactical computer was still trying to categorize. How many, he said. It was not quite a question. 107 confirmed, Sanrei said. Her voice had gone very quiet. Still counting. Yusra Okafor watched the Verith active scan hit the belt on her sensor board and allowed herself exactly 3 seconds of satisfaction. They'd held passive configuration for 8 months. 8 months of crews living in modified asteroid habitats, running cold reactors on minimum power, eating recycled rations and breathing recycled air, because any energy signature above background noise would have shown up on Verith long-range survey. 109 ships. The Graveyard Armada, her people had started calling it, because most of the vessels in it were, technically speaking, dead. Ships that Earth had decommissioned over the past 4 decades, the old Hamilton-class heavy cruisers, the Morrison-class destroyers, the Aegis battle groups that had been replaced by newer designs and officially struck from the fleet register. The Verith knew about Earth's current military fleet. They'd been watching it for years. What they hadn't known was that Earth had never actually scrapped those old warships. They'd been moved. Quietly. To the belt. And for 8 months, the engineers from the Combined Fleet Recovery Program had been doing what humans were, apparently, structurally best at, taking broken, obsolete, half-dead things and making them dangerous again. Admiral, Demir said, and his voice had changed completely. The fear was still there, but something had moved into the front of it. They've gone to active scan. They know. Yes, she said. They know. She reached for the fleet-wide channel. All graveyard elements. This is Admiral Okafor. Active power. All systems. Across the belt, 109 warships woke up. The tactical display in front of Drathvale became a different thing entirely when the human ships powered up. The asteroid belt ignited on his sensors, not one explosion, not one ship, but a cascade of power signatures blooming through the debris field like fires catching across a dried plain. 109, the final count settled on. 109 additional human warships that had not existed in any Verith intelligence assessment, arranged in a formation that wrapped across the leading edge of the belt in a perfect envelopment arc. His 214 ships were now advancing into what had been, until 60 seconds ago, an apparent shooting gallery, and had just revealed itself as a closing trap. All columns halt, he said. His voice was controlled. He was a 400-year-old fleet commander. He did not panic. Reform 2, Commander, Sanrei said, the human primary fleet has gone to attack formation. They're advancing. 41 ships from the inner system, pushing forward. 109 ships from the belt, power readings climbing toward weapons hot status. His fleet between them. He ran the numbers with automatic efficiency. His 214 ships were still the larger force. His technology was still superior. But his formation was wrong. Strung out in 3 advancing columns designed for a direct engagement, not a flanking envelopment. Reforming would take 20 minutes. The human fleet from the inner system would be in weapons range in 12. Emergency reform to sphere defense, he ordered. Siege platforms to center. Signal all captains, weapons free on my authorization. He turned to Sanrei. Get me a transmission to the human command. The channel opened. The human admiral appeared on his screen, a middle-aged woman with gray-streaked hair who looked, he noted with a peculiar sensation, not frightened at all. She looked tired in the specific way of someone who had been working very hard for a very long time and was finally at the end of the task. Supreme Fleet Commander, she said. I'm Admiral Yusra Okafor, Combined Earth Fleet. Admiral. He kept his voice even. This changes your odds, but not your outcome. You are still outmatched by any reasonable assessment. Are we? She said. It wasn't a question either. The first exchange of fire happened at range -4, when the Verith destroyer screen attempted to break left and punch a corridor through the inner edge of the graveyard fleet's formation. It was the correct tactical instinct, identify the weakest sector of an envelopment and hit it before the jaws fully close. What the Verith destroyer captains didn't know, and had no reason to know, was that the graveyard ships hadn't just been repaired. The recovery program engineers had spent 8 months doing something that pure military logic almost wouldn't justify. They had stripped the old phase shield emitters from every decommissioned ship they could find, and replaced them with something the Verith had no entry for in their weapons assessment database. Not energy shields. Mass drivers. Old, brutal, chemical kinetic mass driver batteries, firing solid tungsten penetrators at a fraction of the speed of light. No energy signature until the moment of firing. No electromagnetic profile for a phase shield to key onto. Just physics. Just metal moving very fast through space. The Verith phase shields, which had absorbed every energy weapon test in 60 years of interstellar conquest, did what phase shields always do when struck by a large, dense, non-energized mass moving at significant velocity. They rippled, partially dissipated, and passed approximately 60% of the kinetic energy directly to the hull beneath. Commander Elena Reyes's Persephone, leading the graveyard's left flank column, fired her first salvos at the Verith destroyer formation at 14 hours 23 minutes and 7 seconds fleet time. 2 destroyers lost hull integrity within 11 seconds. A third had its drive section catastrophically damaged and went dark. The rest of the Verith destroyer screen scattered. The graveyard fleet's left arm swung closed like a door. Reyes leaned over the tactical plot and said, quietly, to no one in particular, they don't know what to do with rocks. On the Verith command bridge, the tactical board was becoming difficult to interpret. Not because the data was unclear, the data was devastatingly clear, but because it was describing a situation that Verith tactical doctrine had no formal response to. The incoming fire from the graveyard fleet registered on his sensors as low energy, almost negligible until the moment of impact, at which point Verith phase shields were performing between 40 and 60% of their rated effectiveness. His destroyers were being torn apart by what his tactical computer was classifying, with visible confusion, as ballistic projectile weapons. Ancient technology. Barbaric technology. Technology that the hegemony had abandoned 3,000 years ago because energy weapons were cleaner and more accurate and entirely superseded it. Except that the supersession had only mattered in conflicts against other energy weapon users, and the humans, apparently, were aware of this. Sanrei, he said, with careful precision, what is our phase shield penetration rate against kinetic impactors of this profile? She didn't answer immediately. He already knew the answer wasn't good. At current projectile mass and velocity, approximately 42% of impacts are achieving partial shield penetration. Against sustained fire from this number of batteries, I understand. He did understand. He sat in his command chair and he understood with complete clarity what had happened. They had been shown a weak fleet to study for years. They had been shown exactly the kind of force that Vareth doctrine said they could defeat without complication. And while they had been studying that fleet, the humans had been doing something else entirely, pulling dead ships out of the dark, reviving them with old weapons that had no place in any modern threat assessment model, and waiting. Waiting with what he now recognized was a patience that bordered on geological. "Get me fleet-wide," he said. "I'm authorizing weapons-free, target priority to the graveyard vessels. Focus energy fire on, Commander." Something in Sanrei's voice stopped him. The asteroid belt. Second layer signatures. He looked at the display. Deeper in the belt, past the graveyard line, new power signatures were blooming. Smaller. Faster. He recognized the profile, and his blood went cold. Fighters. Hundreds of them. Stored inside the same asteroids as the warships. Launched now, from inside the belt, with the graveyard fleet as a screen. They were going to run right through his formation. "How?" he said, and for the first time in 400 years the word came out as something very close to genuine awe. "Long have they been planning this?" Yusra Okafor didn't hear the words. But 32 minutes into the engagement, her fleet's position tracker showed her the Vareth command group beginning to restructure, abandoning the sphere defense, attempting to collapse inward to protect the siege platforms. It was the correct response, and it was too late. The graveyard fleet's engagement pattern hadn't been designed just to hit hard. It had been designed by people who had spent 6 years studying Vareth fleet doctrine and 2 years gaming every possible response pattern to this specific formation against this specific enemy in this specific corridor. The Vareth ships that tried to pull back toward the siege platforms ran into the fighter screens. The ones that pushed forward into the inner system to engage the primary human fleet ran into sustained mass driver fire from angles their shields weren't oriented to face. The ones that held position were slowly, systematically reduced by graveyard flanking fire and primary fleet pressure simultaneously. It was not a comfortable battle. Human ships died. The Persephone lost her forward section to a Vareth energy lance at 1451 and Reyes kept fighting from the secondary bridge. 3 of the old Hamilton-class cruisers were lost in the push through the destroyer screen, ships that had already been dead once, Okafor noted, and had come back once, and now were finally finished. She felt each one. She was supposed to feel each one. But she also watched the tactical plot, and the tactical plot said what she had spent 2 years making it say. At 16:04 fleet time, approximately 90 minutes after the belt fleet lit up, the Vareth 8th Armada's command group sent a broad-spectrum transmission. She accepted it immediately. Drathvale appeared on her screen. He looked, she thought, like a man who had just been handed a very complicated piece of information and was still in the process of integrating it. "Admiral Okafor," he said. "I believe." He paused, and in that pause was 400 years of certainty encountering something it had not modeled. "I believe we should discuss terms." She let the silence sit for a moment. Just a moment. "Yes," she said. "I believe we should." The formal transmission that reached the Vareth High Council 11 days later was remarkable primarily for what it didn't say. It didn't explain, in any language the Council's translators could parse, exactly how a species that had possessed spaceflight for less than 2 centuries had managed to hide a fleet of 109 warships in an asteroid belt for 8 months without detection. It didn't explain how they had sourced the kinetic weapon technology or how they had coordinated a fleet of largely obsolete vessels with the discipline and timing of a professional military. What it said, in precise Vareth diplomatic language, was that the 8th Armada had engaged the human defense force in the Sol Corridor and had concluded that continued engagement did not represent favorable strategic outcomes for hegemony assets. The Sol corridor was no longer available as an approach vector. Formally. Permanently. The council member who read the report was 4,000 years old, and in 4,000 years she had read a great many reports of species resisting hegemony absorption. She had never read one that felt quite like this. She flagged it for the Strategic Review Committee with a single notation: reclassify humanity from logistical problem to strategic variable. It was, perhaps, the most consequential reclassification in Verith history. Though no one knew that yet. The humans knew, though. Or at least, some of them did. In a repair dock above Earth, Commander Elena Reyes stood at the observation window of a medical bay and looked at what remained of the Persephone, her ship, her second ship, technically, since the first had been a Morrison-class decommission that she'd nursed back to life over 3 years of dock time before being given command of it. The Persephone would fly again. The engineers had already started, because that was what humans did. They looked at broken things and started asking what it would take. Admiral Okafor arrived at 2100 hours, carrying 2 cups of actual coffee, a significant luxury in the current supply situation, and stood next to her at the window. Neither of them said anything for a long time. "They'll be back," Reyes said eventually. "Different formation. Different approach vector." "Yes. We'll need the graveyard trick exactly once," Reyes continued. "Next time they'll come prepared for kinetic weapons. They'll develop countermeasures. They'll bring more ships." "Yes," Okafor said again. "So we'd better not be the same fleet they find when they get here." Reyes accepted the coffee. "What are we thinking?" The Admiral looked at the half-rebuilt shape of the Persephone against the stars. "There are 4 more decommission yards we haven't touched yet," she said. "And a materials scientist in Johannesburg who's been working on something she calls adaptive reactive plating. And a drive team in Mumbai who thinks they can push a modified Hamilton class to 0.35 C. Reyes was quiet. "That's a lot of dead things to bring back to life." "Yes," Okafor said. She drank her coffee, which was real and warm and tasted like the particular flavor of not having lost yet. "Good thing we've had practice."